I have no idea where to start this review. The first steps were always the hardest to me when it comes to writing, but they are particularly complicated when it comes to Virgo versus the Zodiac. Because of the surprising number of elements affecting the moment-to-moment gameplay at any given time, and because of the weird, sometimes vague, mostly quirky story that left me honestly baffled at the turn of events to the point even now after I had some time to digest it, I still confused about many of its points. Perhaps this is all simply the mark of how much of a great and complete RPG is that even a proper sentence. Well, it is simply the mark of how much of a great and complete RPG it is from beginning to end. The gameplay leaves a lot of room for strategy, and the plot leaves a lot of room for thought. So, perhaps the best way to describe it is to go all the way to the very beginning. After starting up the game and picking a difficulty, Virgo vs. the Zodiac introduces you to its world by way of a short narration by a yet unnamed character that will not be introduced for quite a while, assuming I even manage to guess correctly who the character is. It simply is that sort of game. After telling you about how the golden age of the world, or in this case I suppose the galaxy, is over, the introduction shifts to introducing, as they usually do, the main character, Virgo, a no-nonsense kind of lady who sees corruption and heresy everywhere, and is more than willing to purge all of it on her quest to bring the golden age back, whatever that entails. Truly, she is the kind of person that would make the Empyrean of Men proud. Also, she has a gingerbread man following her wherever she goes, because, like I said, it's just that kind of game. Soon after the short introduction, you are thrown into battle with little explanation of what to do, as the game preferred to sprinkle its tutorials throughout rather than drop it all at once onto your head, which usually I consider a very sound decision, especially in games with a lot more complex and non-intuitive mechanics. But you will wish they had explained it all at once, since if you're like me, you probably just straight up almost fucking died on the very first battles. If you didn't just outright die in the very first battles. For you see, this is the kind of game that is of that kind of game. That kind being quirky, yes, but unlike some of its indie brethren, completely tough as nails, with a take no hostages attitude, better get ready to replay every single boss kind of game. The game operates sort of like Paper Mario, or perhaps a better descriptor for it would be like the devs themselves said it, the Mario and Luigi RPG series, being that they are turn-based games where you must time your attacks to achieve maximum damage, and also timing your guards to minimize damage during enemy turns. And honestly, that's their game is perhaps a more accurate comparison, since I always felt you needed tighter timing in Mario and Luigi, and in Virgo vs. the Zodiac, you need the tightest timing, as you need to get ready to do whatever you need to do and press the correct button in the correct order in usually half a second or less. Meaning, I hope you got reflexes, buddy, especially since missing a perfect chance at any time, especially during important battles, can end up spelling your doom rather quickly, like one turn party wipe, kind of unforgiving. Like I said, it ain't a very forgiving game. Complicating matters further is the shield system, which works kind of like this. Every character, playable or enemy, has a separate health bar made out of purity. If you hit an enemy and it has a purity bar, the game will drain the purity bar before it can hit directly at its health. But if an attack hit a purity bar at any point, even if the attack drains it completely, then whoever got their purity broken can, well, technically has to unleash a counterattack. This means directly attacking enemies with purity bars without thinking about it will quickly result in a party wipe from a flood of counterattacks. However, counterattacks cannot be countered even if they hit a purity bar instead of a health one, so going on a defensive stance at the beginning of tough battles is usually the better option, allowing you to drain the enemy of their defenses before going in for the kill. It's actually a pretty fun system to play around with, rewarding you for knowing when to defend and when to attack, while punishing you if you attack too hard by using counterattacks, and also punishing you by playing too defensively by slowly draining your resources in a war of attrition while dragging battles through a snail's pace, like war of attritions. Unless, of course, you are willing to take some risks. Coupled with the difficulty of every single battle, this makes for a battle system that is much more engaging than it might look at first glance. With the main battle system out of the way, let us take a moment to appreciate the sheer courage of the devs by taking inspiration not only from a franchise from a bankrupt company, but also from another one that hasn't seen a game in 16 years and survives today through the sheer power of indie game memory. Before delving into the second step of my experience, which was opening the menu only to be met with a boatload of unclear, weirdly named stats, almost every one of which affected more than just themselves when up or down, causing even more confusion. If that wasn't enough confusion for you, then get ready to know that the gear each character has affects not only their stats, but also the skills they can use, each piece of gear having their own version of a particular skill, which with you being able to equip 4 weapons that will decide your 4 offensive skills, and also 4 pieces of armor that will decide your 4 counter-attack skills, since they operate essentially from completely separate from one another. All of these systems operate on a triangular advantage system comprised of ambition, versatility, and patience, each weapon carrying one of these elements of sorts, if you can call them that, and being strong against a particular enemy of another element. These are also the names of 3 of your stats, which directly affect how much damage you will deal of each element, among other things, with enemies being able to be of a certain type while also dishing out damage of another type. And don't forget, every piece of gear always carries demerits to your stats instead of just increases, so you always have to choose what to sacrifice if you want to gain something from it. And going back to the battle system for a short moment, ambition, versatility, and patience also play a major role in the healing system, because for the majority of the time you will heal using drinks, namely coffee, tea, and or lemonade. You can only carry 5 of each, which is kind of a small quantity. However, the game distributes them without a care, thusly creating a cycle that encourages you to spend them a lot. And spend you shall, for when you heal using a drink of a specific element, your defenses against that element are raised, so you always want to drink something that makes you stronger against your enemy's elements whenever possible. Not even healing is straightforward in this game. It's decisions after decisions after decisions at all times, which is great, for me at least, unless you just came home from a very stressful workday with severe choice fatigue. Then it's very, very bad. So yeah, this game is basically a brick wall at the beginning, and I can see why it will turn people away, but if you are willing to climb it, I think you will find a deeply rewarding experience on the other side. The gameplay is tough, but fair, requiring you to think about your next move in fights that would be treated as just simple, straightforward affairs in other RPGs, and the game features no random encounters at all, meaning every single fight and every single party of enemies was specifically tailored, sometimes to give you a really hard time, almost as if they were a sequence of mini-puzzles, which I really enjoyed. The soundtrack is a series of never-ending really cool tunes that fit every situation they play in, from sad moments to the more slice-of-life stuff, and of course blood-pumping music for boss battles. Except that description I just gave is complete bullshit, because actually sometimes it feels very ethereal and maybe inappropriate in fact, and backlash-inducing depending on the scene it plays. But in a good way, given the way the game presents itself and its themes, so I suppose you could say it's inappropriately appropriate. Yeah, let's go with that. I like the sound of that. Oh, also when I say never ending, what I actually meant was 64. There are 64 tracks. Yeah, 64. Not only it's a boatload of good grooving tunes, but even the soundtrack is memeing on us. The story, which we had to go into more depth at some point, is weird, to say the least, and I imagine it will be the most divisive element of the game, since it is filled with mysterious lore and weird places that at first glance can look completely random, though of course they are not at all. Though following the sequence of events is not hard by itself, most of the time at least, a lot of twists and powers comes out of left field with little foreshadowing help. Basically no foreshadowing at all, which can make some events feel cheap and leave you wondering if there were really any point to them. Of course, the lore and backstory of the game being mysterious as well, as divided all over the place in the descriptions of random objects, having to share space with many other objects whose descriptions are just puns or jokes, can make piecing the true nature of everything an almost impossible task, assuming the devs gave us all of the necessary pieces of the puzzle in the first place. So in the end, who knows, maybe my brain is just too small, or I didn't explore hard enough for the clues and all events were in fact heavily foreshadowed and made complete sense. Or maybe the devs just wrote whatever they wanted with little regards for how everything actually fit together in the end. And that's the problem with games that include heavy elements of vagueness and mysteriousness. You can never quite pinpoint if the writers are geniuses or just screwing around. The fact this one is covered in the quickness one would find games like, well, Mother 3 just adds one more maddening level of obfuscation to the whole ordeal. There are other YouTubers that made better points about how hard it can be to actually figure out if what you are playing or seeing or reading is the intention of the artist. Like, for example, a recent Silent Hill video by Thor High Heels that I highly recommend. So let's just leave it at that, because he can probably explain these feelings way better than I can. And staying right in the middle of this entire storm of polarization, polarization. Yeah, thanks for that, Google. I should probably have used you to figure out how to spell obfuscation as well. Well, right in the middle of this entire storm of what Google just said is the main character herself, Virgo, who the game description describes as an obsessed villain and is indeed introduced as a character with an obsession with the concepts of purity and corruption, and even carries the title of Holy Maiden herself to showcase how purity defines her. And she is no silent protagonist, not at all. In fact, she is more than happy to answer every single query in a single-minded way that showcases her distaste for heresy. And yet, her actions usually completely contradicts her words. The game constantly reminds us that her path is filled with bloodshed, and yet she never really kills anyone without provocation. She is more than okay with just talking with enemies if they won't attack her, and you can even make choices for her at pivotal moments that allow her to spare every single Zodiac she fights against, making her more of a figure of grey morality than anything else. And given the weird, often counterintuitive processes of the game's world, it is questionable whether anyone can be anything but morally grey, if not just straight up morally confusing. Like, bear with me for a second, is it a crime to eat an inhabitant of your kingdom every year as a sacrifice if they are happy with it, and you can just straight up resurrect them in an endless cycle? Cause yeah, that's a thing that happens. And such moral dilemmas make what a heresy count as even harder to define. Virgo constantly talks about smiting the heretics, and yet as she goes on she calls even people who follow the traditions of their lands as heretics, without providing an alternative herself. And even later in the game, when you visit her own kingdom, what counts as pure is still ill-defined, to say the best way to put it, I think. Further muddling issues is the fact that you can get her to commit minor heresies throughout the game, with the menu even having a heresy counter to tally up your sins, but the only time I managed to trigger it, I didn't even consider what I did a heresy, or that it could even be considered a heresy. In fact, I did similar things throughout the whole game, but this one time, the game added it up as a heresy mark against Virgo. This means Virgo is not as pure as she displays herself, neither is she the bloodthirsty warmonger other characters describe her as. She is distinctly more milquetoast than the game's own description lets it out either, so in the end, the only title I can think for her is Galactic Tsundere, because that's pretty much what she is. Then again, with heresies being ill-defined, Virgo herself being accused of them and being able to finish the game with no unprovoked casualties through the player's choices, which by the way leads to multiple endings, so another reason to replay the game, might in fact be the entire point of it all. Virgo follows a code of holiness so strict even she doesn't understand it, making it impossible for anyone to be anything but a heretic in her view. But it is convenient enough for her to use as an excuse for all of her worst actions, even if she isn't as bad as the game might try to convince you to think, leading her to be a morally confusing figure in a world of morally confusing figures that refuse to play by the moral quandaries of her own physical plane of reality. She's not special among the Zodiacs, she's exactly the same as the other Zodiacs, being that every Zodiac is special in their own way, and the only reason she's our point of view for the story is because she's strong enough to enforce her nostalgic views of the past onto everyone else, deeply affecting the fate of the galaxy regardless of if they accept her or not. Which might be an incredible dash of depth, or it could just be the writer fucked up writing her. As I said, in these kinds of games, you just never really know. But the game gave me food for thought, which is way more than most games give these days. And I mean, I'm just writing up a storm about all of these details, which is way more fun than I'd like to admit. And I'd rather have a flawed, ambitious story than a well-formulated but cliché one any day of the week. So yeah, I'm gonna give this story an A++. Even though at this point in time I still can't say flawed or even ambitious are the right words to describe it, but yeah, at least it's a little bit thought-provoking. Let's give it at least that. And speaking about thought-provoking, let's provoke some thoughts by talking about an abstract topic in video games: atmosphere. When it comes to game reviewing, it's easy to list some topics every game review used to touch at some point: the gameplay, the music, the story. I don't treat game reviewing as a science though. I think games are much more than the sums of their mathematical parts, particularly in how they make you feel. And by that I mean emotions, not like how they really make you feel like the Batman or Spider-Man. Sorry, IGN. And in that context, a word that appears a lot is atmosphere, usually to describe the bad vibes tracks through the not-so-desolate lands of Chernobyl's exclusion zone caused to the reviewers, but it can also mean a lot about good vibes as well, as anyone who has ever played an Animal Crossing title can attest to. And in this case, it's all about the weird vibes, rarely ever comforting vibes. I felt wonder as I explored the many different worlds of this crazy, weird Milky Way. And I admit I laughed at way more silly descriptions of objects than I'm unwilling to admit, and even character interactions can be bursts of fun times. One particular moment that struck with me being when I talked to an enemy expecting a fight, only for it to recite the starting lyrics to What is Love before suddenly exploding, thus creating an eternal mark against me for having shit taste in humor, but fuck, I still thought it was funny. But even so, without the fun and jokes, I never really felt safe visiting any of the worlds, mostly because they carry the old JRPG tradition of only having places that are relevant to the main quest. And while in old JRPGs that would mean basic villages with only 6 people and a few shops, here it means vast swaths of land that may or may not have enough residences to house the 100 or so NPCs you can find, that may or may not be connected in ways that make any sense at all, and in which every object may or may not hold a funny joke or a surprise enemy attack, while filled with places that will normally be empty and may be useless as if it wasn't for a festival or a play being held conveniently whenever Virgo shows up. Sometimes while being held above an endless void, sometimes surrounded by 1,000 eyes, and sometimes filled with blood-soaked corpses of its denizens, killed by whatever might be near and ready to try to murder Virgo next, as well, for any number of nonsensical reasons. That might just be a funny joke reason, or not. It's a surreal world out there. A joke-filled, pun-laden world with many amicable personalities, but one in which threats can jump at any moment and in which the rules and traditions which are completely unfamiliar to the player, if not to Virgo herself, can land you in hot water at any point, which makes for a distinctly unsafe feeling world, which gave me some real uncomfortable vibes at times, while making me forget them the next time I visited a vampire restaurant/club and had Virgo dance the night away before getting hammered on the drink that has approximately more than 100% alcohol in it. Undertale this is not, feeling more like a light-hearted take on Earthbound's final moments, stretched across an entire game. So yeah, tell me how much you can figure it out with that sentence alone, because I sure as hell can find the words to describe it in a more precise way. Helping the matters of world and atmosphere is the excellent world design and vivid sprite art of the characters and enemies that might not look like much in the overworld, but pop out vividly bouncing up and down and doing all kinds of crazy spins and tricks during battle, which is much appreciated, accentuated by the excellent UI design, which does clash a little bit with the more pixelated, well, everything else that is not the UI or the character portraits, but which is excellent anyway, not only visually but also to navigate. I have always said that a good design is one that shows all the information to the player needs to make good choices, even if it has to be a straight up Excel spreadsheet to show it. And Virgo vs. the Zodiac thankfully didn't hear me and designed with a lot of information, but just the necessary information you need at any given menu to make the correct choice, while also adding features that make it easy to compare gear as well as to understand the results of crafting and upgrading gear, because of course you can do that too. This is a full-fledged RPG, remember? And of course, before I forget, there are girls in this game. Lots and lots of cute, cool girls. I don't know what else to say in this section. I wish I was a stronger man and said I bought this game for any other reason, but no, the thing that really tipped me over, what really brought me here, were the cute girls. And here they are. I'm sorry, I'm a miserable excuse for a person. Anyway, it's about time I do what I always do and bring this review to a sudden halt, because it has gone on for so long, my brain is melting even thinking about it. There is seriously some blood and grey matter falling out of my right ear onto my headphones as I write this, because this is simply, it's the last time I'll say this, so please bear with me, the kind of game Virgo vs. the Zodiac is. And while I may have some personal reservations about it, mainly about the plot since the gameplay is wonderful in every single aspect, I still can wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who wants to shuffle away from this mortal coil in an amusing, brain-blasting way like myself. And honestly, this game, it feels like it's going to be kind of a hidden gem, and it doesn't deserve to be that. It deserves to shine on full display on every computer like the crazy diamond it truly is. With that out of the way, I think I shall soon replay this one to aim for another ending, and this is probably my last review of the year, so I'm very glad to go out on a good note. See you guys next year. See you later, alligators. Wait, is there anything else I'm forgetting about? Oh yeah, fuck this ice puzzle and the horse it rode on. Just fuck it, I got more than an hour stuck on this fucking shit, no joke, more than a fucking hour. Fuck!